same verse we were on last week and the same verse we were on the week before. So we've gone through, we're looking at chapter 3, verses 2 through 4, and we're looking at this list that's given, and we left off on truce breakers. And so he's talking about all of these negative attributes that people are going to have in the last days, in this time to come. And we know that happened then, it's going on now. This wasn't meant to be this is a sign that Jesus is coming tomorrow. You know, that's not the idea. That some people look at it in that way. They say, well, things are getting worse and worse, and so they've gotten so bad. Yeah, these are the times that we're being talked about. No, all of this was the times that we're being talked about. This is man continuing to go back toward being evil. When was man not evil? Never. Yes. You know, we've always had some level of disobedience, but we see Adam in the garden, and we get the picture that he was with God, so there wasn't a problem until there was a problem. But even then, we don't get the picture of him being like everyone else became during the time before the flood. So we do see man getting worse and worse, and that's a key. And then we get the flood. So only 8 souls were saved. Were those 8 really, really good souls? Or just maybe better than some of the rest in that they did obey God? And so they were saved. But they were still prone to sin. So it's not just a question of being prone to sin. There's a degree of hatefulness and irreverence that man basically adopts. And we've seen that cycle continue. And it continues even today. So these things are important because he's telling Stephen not to eliminate it. He's not giving him that responsibility. He does give him a responsibility to deal with it. Brother Tharp.
It seems to be a problem with free will. And like you said, if you'd have done it, you would have not had free will. But even in the Garden of Eden, there wasn't much they could do wrong. He only gave them a very simple rule, but that gave them free will. And when you have free will, you have choices. Somebody's going to choose one way and somebody's going to choose the other way. Sin is inevitable. And even in our own lives, only one person is able to live their whole life without sinning. So,
yeah, I always have a problem with that term. Sin is inevitable, and I understand the way you're using it. So it's obviously not wrong. We have all sinned, and all that will come will sin. We know this because God has told us this. But just as long as we understand, we're not let off the hook for it because we are capable of not sinning.
Sin itself is not inevitable. Our ability not to sin.
Because we're going to make those choices.
We're going to make that
But Jesus gives us the example that shows that it is indeed and has been always within our ability to not sin. So, you know, this is the sin nature of man. He, as you mentioned, one rule. There's one rule, one tree, don't eat of that tree. And again, the Bible talks about, well, Eve was tricked, but Adam has no excuse. Eve doesn't have an excuse either. He doesn't give her an excuse, but you know, it's one thing to be tricked. It's another thing to go into it knowing full well that what you're doing is wrong. And so either one had sinned, but Adam's sin was definitely of a different sort. The Bible makes that very clear. So these are the people that he's going to have to deal with, and he's going to need to deal with them within the church. And so we get to truce breakers, people who are unreliable. They do not keep agreements or promises. They're just not willing to stick to their word. That's definitely a sign of today. I still would love to receive payment for a couple of contracts that I worked on that were agreed upon. And just keep your agreement. I kept my end, you keep your end. This is the world today. And unless we go to the law, unless people are compelled, there are many people who won't keep their word, not voluntarily. Yes.
And the worst ones are who are the ones who go in knowing that ahead of time. They know they're not going to keep their word. You know, we seem to want to call that a lie, but I think it's a different category than lie. This is actively harming somebody and knowing that you're actively harming somebody.
Yes. Yeah, this is doing something to someone. And not to make one better than the other, but I would agree with you from a categorization standpoint. You're actively doing something to someone. You're not, you know, many times people lie for themselves to deceive people for themselves, as opposed to trying to harm someone. But if you go into enter into an agreement knowing you're not going to keep it, you are actively harming someone, intending to do harm to them. It may not be physical harm, but you are harming them.
And I think that you'll see also that the term false witness, even though again that's a lie with an intent to harm somebody, even kill them, because back then 2 false witnesses and somebody was put to death. So it's even kind of categorized a little different too.
Yeah. Well, God tends to be very specific in a lot of these, especially when we look under the law and look at the details. A lot of times we gloss over a lot of those social elements of the law that God gave them. But he ruled over a lot of things in great detail and gave people great guidelines. And there were distinctions. There were distinctions between murder and manslaughter. There were distinctions between various harms that could come to someone else's property and the punishments that went along with it. Or sometimes consequences, restitution. Wasn't necessarily as much there's consequences in the form of punishment, and then there's restitution. Restitution isn't necessarily a punishment, it's just making things right. And so God governed all of those things, and with great distinction. Sometimes we don't make those distinctions today, but indeed they are there. So someone who's going to be very unreliable within the church is obviously going to be a problem. And again, we're talking about people that are going to enter into the church and do this. The obvious problem is, first problem, is that these people are going to be an influence upon the rest of the church, right? These things, once they're there, they start to spread if you don't deal with them. And so Timothy does need to know about this. We need to know about this as well. He goes on and talks about false accusers. Those that are going to accuse someone falsely, not just lie about someone. Okay, that's important. Not just someone that's going to say something that's just not true, but it's going to be something not true about someone else that will be an accusation against them. So Brother Tharp already mentioned the issue here is this isn't
It's not just a lie.
yeah, it's not harmless. You're actually doing harm to someone, and it's not just a question of their reputation. By doing this, you can have very big consequences for another person. So it could end up with their death, something irreversible like that. But even today, we don't see necessarily, I mean, that could happen even today with false accusers. But we can also see other consequences, people losing their jobs, losing their companies, losing their families, all over false accusations. So these are things that are extremely harmful. And I don't believe any of us have any of those intentions, but again, if we're not watchful of the influence that comes into the church, that will spread. Brother Tharp.
Well, I mean, we saw Jesus put to death by false accusations. I would say that in our hyper-connected world today, that innocent, you didn't intend great harm, but sometimes it can snowball and cause tremendous harm to people. And there's all kinds of stories on the internet. Somebody just said something and it run away, ruins people's lives. So, although we don't rarely put people to death by false accusations, we tend to ruin people's lives nowadays.
Oh, I was watching or reading about a circumstance where someone took their own life in Korea, and it was a result of false accusations. But of course, people ran with it and believed it, and you can prove it to be false later, but the harm has already been done. So these things, real big consequences. And we've got to be careful about it. Not only ourselves, again, we ourselves have to be careful that we are not accusing someone falsely, but again, we have to be careful of allowing that influence to just be in our presence without us calling attention to it, without us saying, well, hey, especially in our political environment, we see people just sling things back and forth, and they have no regard for the truth. And it doesn't matter where you align politically, it truly doesn't matter. We as Christians should stand for the truth. We should be able to agree on that, Brother Tharp.
And I think it would probably fall under this, false accusations. With AI, this is particularly a problem in junior high and high school. These kids are getting AI and slapping a girl they know picture on a nude body and distribute it. And some girls have killed themselves and ruined people. That's a false accusation because that's not a true picture. It's a false picture. And like you said, some people were just assassinated because somebody gets all riled up about political postings. And it's out of hand.
Yes.
It's really out of hand.
With the example you gave with AI, it's really a big problem because that power is going to become more and more common,
The truth's hard to know.
and it's going to be easier and easier for people to access the ability to do that. And the government wants to give, and again, it's not some political speech, I'm just saying this reality wants to give a sense of security. We're doing things to help with this and help control this. There is no control over it. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I just want us to be realistic. These are things we're going to have to deal with. How? I have no idea. I don't know how to deal with something like that where people will be tempted to do very vile and harmful things to other people just because they have the ability to do so with the power that's in their pocket and a cell phone. That's going to be something other than starting at home with the teaching at home. It's going to be very difficult for us to do anything about this. And so the only thing we can do is try to instill in one another a sense of godliness, a sense of reverence, a sense of understanding that we will be called into account for our actions. Without that, you would think I can get away with anything, especially with more and more power at your disposal. Brother Tharp.
And along with the abuses against other people, we're seeing more and more false stories, I mean, for the last 10 years, but even more now that are backed up by to make an attempt to not just believe anything we read or see without verifying it before we act on it.
Yeah, the problem with anything like that is I could counter it. I could set up a site that says this is true. Just wouldn't cost much of anything to do. And so anybody can say that, and then so you have to have trusted sources, and you have to be able to investigate, do some thinking yourself, which is becoming less and less of a commodity for us to think for ourselves. It's a problem. Again, it's not to just scare us. We do need to understand that at some point, the only answers we have is teaching people about morality so that they will self-govern. Sister Butcher.
I think it is up to us as individuals and Christians to also not jump on any bandwagon. And you hear gossip's been around forever. The false accusations, kids starting rumors to put someone down because they're hurt or they're jealous. Our job is not to jump on that and feed it and spread it. And that's where a lot of the problem comes. People jump on stuff and we've got people out picketing or doing this at places. They don't even know why they're there. They just jumped on the bandwagon. They just, something's going on, let me jump in. You've got to be a little more self-control and weed through all the garbage.
Yes.
We should be spreading love and truth, and we don't need to be jumping on all those bandwagons.
That's true. I mean, I don't want to get into the idea of a political side of things, just from what are we about as Christians? What is our goal? What is our purpose? Again, the world is going to do what the world is going to do, but what is our purpose? It is to spread the truth. That's our purpose. That's our goal. That's our directive. So, even in the midst of, and it didn't all start with AI, of course, but like you said, gossip's always been around, and it could spread quickly. But what we used to think is quickly is very different. I mean, office gossip would spread around the office very, very quickly. Now, somebody in the privacy of their own home can get on a computer and have something spread all over the world. That's a completely different magnitude. The idea of spreading gossip by a letter, where I'd have to actually sit down and write it by hand and put it in an envelope and go and mail it and send it to somebody to spread, it's not worth it. But nowadays, just take out my phone and type whatever I want with anonymity. It's a lot easier, and that's a reality. So it's nothing new, but these tools, and they're just tools. The tools themselves aren't good or evil. It's just our use of them that's good and evil, and that gets back to us. When you start automating things, it's going to be a whole different problem. The people that do that automation are going to be accountable for the things that are done. People aren't going to be able to say, well, look, it's not me. You're making choices, you're making decisions that will affect people's lives. So this next one, incontinent. Incontinent. This is nothing to do with going to the restroom, but it's very similar concept. It's a lacking of self-control. The words mean something. It lacks self-control. Someone who can't control their own impulses, can't control their own desires. And this can be in a variety of areas. We obviously think of things like sexual immorality and lust, that sort of thing. But it can also be talking about the idea of anger. I can't control my anger. It can also be talking about just indulgence. I'm going to take what I want. I can take what I see. That's a problem. I can't control it. This is obviously something that we see. This is also nothing new. And I don't believe anything in here will be, we're really see, well, obviously it was written at a time, so it's clearly not new. But even in its current manifestations, it's not new. It's just a different form of these concepts. Brother Tharp.
I think my translation uses without self-control, because that's what you kind of equated it with, right?
Yes, yeah, without self-control.
It's just a person who lets himself fly off the handle, get angry every time. I'm trying to figure out what's the more broader meaning of it.
Yeah, like I said, anger management is part of it. That's it's
the person who's
anything where you can't control your impulses. And so again, this is actually a good example explaining where the King James Version renders it incontinent. We may not think of that word in that way. We hear that word and we think more medical issue, someone that can't control other aspects. But it's the same idea. You can see the common aspect of the word there. I'm not able to control something. So even though we use it differently today, it's applicable. But to make it a very more common thing in today's vernacular, lack of self-control. But we must make sure we look at it in the broader sense than the way we normally think about it. For some reason, when we read about lack of self-control in the Bible, oftentimes we think of sexual immorality. And so that's the reason I call attention to anger issues as being one of those issues. Issues of indulgence. There are people who steal things because they don't think it's that big a deal. They're small things. And they have a lack of self-control. They can't control that impulse. That's a problem. Any sort of indulgence where you're struggling with self-control, that becomes a problem. That becomes an issue. So I'm going to take...
Would you put drugs under this category?
So, yes, to a degree, but, when we're talking about an addiction, it is a lack of self-control there, but at what point is that line because now you're addicted? Now, that's not to say you don't share any responsibility for that. But again, that can become just about anything. Look, drinking, my doctor had recommended a while ago, drinking a cup of coffee every morning. Why? It helps stimulate the metabolism. So they were talking about the benefits of that. Well, I'm not a coffee drinker, so they recommended tea. Same idea, it's the caffeine. But when you become addicted to the caffeine, and it's not addictive in the same sense of narcotics and things of that nature, but when you have a real problem there, and there are people who have a real problem, not just I'm no good before my first cup of coffee. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a real problem. You've got to start examining now, are you exhibiting a lack of self-control? And what's the problem ultimately with a lack of self-control? As Christians, we need to always have some measure of control. Otherwise, we're willing to compromise anything for the thing that we desire. Brother Tharp.
And when we use the word incontinent, that sort of gives the idea of out of our control, because people don't, wet themselves on purpose. Most people don't.
Yeah.
But when it's used in this context, self-control, these are people who don't attempt to control themselves because by implications we should be able to control ourselves. And I agree, addiction there gets to a point where your body takes over, but you let yourself get to that point.
Yeah, and so that's the only reason I don't want to sound like, oh, well, no, that has nothing to do with it, because there was a point, there's a choice that you're making, especially in today's day and age where people go into utilizing drugs with a lot of warnings. They know full well. Now, I'm not talking about somebody who gets addicted to painkillers because of a situation where they were hurt and harmed. There are some situations I've read about, and they can be pretty tragic. When you read about Michael Jackson's life, it's not quite what I thought it was once, back way back when, and seeing some of the things that happened where he was experiencing pain all the time over an accident that had occurred, and became very addicted to certain pharmaceuticals. That's, we have to look at certain things with some level of compassion. Now, do we still bear responsibility? Of course we do. Of course we do. But not everyone goes into it just saying, well, I just want to escape or something like that. Sometimes we can become uncompassionate toward people's situations and not understanding that some people do get into bad situations and need help, really need help. But either way, that situation of having a lack of self-control is a problem. However you might have gotten there, it's a problem, Brother Tharp.
And it can come on ways you don't expect. I think I've mentioned once before, my uncle, a cop, used to run 5 to 7 miles every morning. And then one day, for a day or two, he wasn't able to run. And he said it was like an addiction. All he could think about was, I didn't run, because his body was getting endorphins when he ran. And he made the wise choice to, I'm going to vary to different kind of activity, because he didn't want to be controlled by the fact that if I can't run today, that's all my body's going to tell me is I didn't run today. So he did the very thing we're talking about, self-control, and didn't continue running every day. He ran sporadically, so it wasn't an addiction.
Yeah. So I mean, there's actions we take, and prayerfully, most of us we're aware of things in the sense that we do need to be in control in order to be good Christians. Not in control in the sense of I'm going to control circumstances I can't control, but rather in control of myself, in control of my impulses. So when we're talking about this in this context, we're talking about people who just have no self-control at all. And they're going to be amongst you. That means they're going to impact you. The next one, fierce. The idea of just being very brutal in their behavior. We see that. We see people being very, very harsh today. Extremely harsh today. Unkind. People seem to be just plain unkind to one another. And it seems to be okay. Not only does it seem to be okay, we seek it out. People become famous for that type of behavior. Just being mean. Now, there was a time, and maybe this was just me, but it seemed like the people I knew, they wanted to avoid people who were mean. There was a house. There was a man that lived there, and he was just mean all the time. And people wanted to avoid that particular household. Now somehow we relish in it. It's funny. We can pull it up on YouTube and we can laugh at people being mean. We can read about it and we can laugh at people just being mean to one another.
TV heroes.
Well, TV doesn't really, maybe I'm wrong, but TV doesn't seem to have, I don't watch much TV anymore. And if I do, it's old. I've been told my mind is stuck in the 80s, and that may be true. I don't like a lot of stuff today. I don't know of many TV heroes today. Everybody seems to be this anti-hero. That seems to be the really big thing, and I just, personally, that has no appeal to me.
You gotta go back in time. Andy Griffith and
Yeah, you know, I have a CD player for a reason. So I can consume what I like, and I know sometimes it's an insult to say, you're stuck in that time, but I'm okay there. You know, but this idea of being just really harsh, no ability to deal with anything in a gentle way, in a compassionate way. You know, if you're gentle, or, you know, do people want to be known as being gentlemen these days? I mean, that concept was the word before, was it not? The idea that a gentleman, someone who behaved themselves well, had a certain demeanor. That's not the demeanor that people like today. That's not what they gravitate toward. Sister
not
Butcher.
too many have it today. Incontinent goes along with that because if they're not in control of that anger, we see it constantly on TV. That's why I don't turn it on very often. It's a constant, but people are feeding on it. People, like you said, they're looking at it like it's entertainment. Kids nowadays, how many of these young kids are just going in and shooting at a school? They get mad, someone said something to them, they go get a gun, and no one's being held accountable for controlling their own emotions and their anger. And that probably started when they were young. They probably were not taught properly how to control your anger. There's another way to divert your anger instead of lashing out. And some people have not learned that. And today it's wild. And now they get a spotlight. It seems to be, this is what people want. I'm going to be a hero. I'm going to go down in history. There's so much evil out there now that's being portrayed as entertainment. And that's where we probably need to be more on social media, spreading God's word, spreading good news. I always say, why isn't there just one news channel that only talks about the good things that happen? You know? And there are things, there's good people out there that do nice things, but they're not.
It doesn't get ratings. I'm going to come back to what you said. Lisa.
A lot of this starts in the home. Because my generation, she was correcting us. I'm your parent, I am not your best friend. And I hear a lot from the younger generation that I work with, oh, my 5-year-old's my best friend. Oh, they're my best friend. They should not be your best friend at 5 years old. You're the parent. There's a separation between being a parent and being a friend. And that has been so convoluted now that parents are not being parents. They're not training the child up in the way that they should be trained. And because of that now, kids do not know where the boundaries are. Because they have no boundaries, because no one is being a parent.
I want to comment on each of these, so you need to each remember your own comments, because I've already indicated I'm old and I'm going to forget. Brother Tharp.
Yeah, what she was saying, it starts with lack of discipline. But the word here, you know, we're equating it with one end of the spectrum, being mean and stuff like that. But if you look at it a little bit more, it's lack of the other side. It's without gentleness. It's fierce, angry. So, like you said, the old man down the block who was never nice to anybody, that's kind of more what it's talking about. Because I know people who can be kind and then fly off the handle and be angry. And then
And that was Michael. I've got three to remember. Michael, did you have a comment?
I was just gonna say, parents raising their kids, when I was a kid, especially boys, you were expected not to cry. Don't cry. Don't cry. And the only remedy you had when your feelings were hurt is you watched your parents or grown-ups when they got angry. When they got their feelings hurt, they showed anger. So the child learns that's how you take care of her feelings, showing anger. And I think growing up, you have to wean out of that, but it's something that's got to be watched out for too.
Yes. Yeah, so connecting with a bunch of these, the idea between the two, incontinent and fierce, the lack of self-control. I can't control my anger. And leading to the next. They're not totally disconnected, but we see a progression here, and there are small distinctions. This idea of being just mean implies this is not a person that's not lacking self-control. This is who they are. This is what they do. They're harsh. Whereas a person who's lacking self-control, it seems to be they can't hold it back. We get angry. There are things that upset us. But we are to exhibit some self-control. So we're not lashing out in harsh words and harsh actions and hurtful responses just because somebody maybe did something hurtful to us. That means we have to have self-control. But now, when you talk about somebody who's just, this is who they're going to be. They're going to be rough. They're going to be mean. They're going to be angry. It's not a question of, I became angry over some situation, some ill that was done. There's a proper realm for that, but it must always be with control. But the idea of just being angry, just being harsh, that's not a godly situation. And as Lisa talked about, people wanting to be their children's best friends. Look, there's nothing wrong with wanting to have a good relationship with your children. There's nothing wrong with that. But I agree, you're not just best friends. Some of that today, as my observation, is that people want to retain their youthfulness. And so that's how they want to be perceived. And that's a problem for the parents that we're passing on to the children. So parents need to be parents. Sometimes that may mean, that may mean that most of the time everything is just really good. There's just no problem. But there may come a point in time where you have to address things. And if you don't, people are, going back to what Sister Betry was talking about, kids are going to have a problem with their own impulse control. At the expense of just sounding old, again, when my daughter was playing t-ball and they said, well, we don't keep score, this is just ridiculous. Kids can deal with winning and losing a game. One of the baseball teams I played Little League for might as well have been called the Bad News Bears. We seemed to lose every single game. But we had fun doing it. It's possible for kids to learn how to not only win, but lose. The idea we're going to wipe out any of that means we're wiping out the realm where they get to exercise self-control. The same comes with some level of ridicule. Kids need to work some things out, and I'm not advocating bullying. Please don't. I know that's a very sensitive thing to say these days, but I do believe children do need a proper realm in which they can work some things out between themselves. I again use my daughter as an example. We're teaching her how to read and how to write long before she went to preschool. I wanted her in preschool so that she could finally be around some kids. There were no children her age in the church. And I needed her to learn how to interact with kids. She knew how to interact with adults and not kids. And the very first day there, she's crying because someone put a baby in a dishwasher or washing machine, and she comes to me crying. And I just go work it out. We have to allow them that realm to learn that, and we don't want to do it. We don't want them to have those challenges, so we just avoid it. It's to our own detriment. Brother Thorpe.
Yeah, overprotection is just as bad as not teaching them anything. I've seen so many kids, homeschooled kids, or where their parents just protect them to. Now they've got to deal with society, and they're completely unprepared. They're like a 2-year-old at high school age having to deal with people because they never learned it. So overprotection is not the answer either.
Yes. Now, I'll state something that is purely opinion, but when it comes to things like public school, I've been asked about that with all of the elements that are being introduced now as part of public school. I still wouldn't necessarily advocate keeping Christian children away. They just have to learn to deal with it. Well, we have to start addressing things before they're ready. You better get them ready, because you're not going to keep them from it. Don't think they can watch a Disney cartoon today. The fact is, it's not that the kids aren't ready. The kids have to be ready for whatever is going to come their way. It's the parents that aren't ready. We're uncomfortable with it. But this is the reality of today. And so we better equip our children. We better teach them. Think about the law being read to children. Back in Deuteronomy, it said, you're going to read the law, all of it, to who? To everyone who is able to understand. There's some things in the law that are pretty difficult. They're being introduced to all of those things that you don't want them to be introduced to. They were being introduced under the law. So trying to protect them in that way is not really the pattern. I only say that to say in opinion. Protecting our children, teaching them, that's our job. That's not opinion. But whether they go to public school or private school or whatever, that's of course an individual determination. I just am advocating that whatever is going on in society, we need to prepare our children morally to deal with it. This next one is just funny. Despisers of those that are good. Now, earlier on when I came to the church, I used to find this one a little bit more ridiculous than I do now. Because I've learned, I didn't understand then. And I've learned there are people who actually don't like people who do good. They detest people that do good. And I would have thought, who in their right mind wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want that as a neighbor, as a friend? So why? Why would people oppose people who are doing good? Yes.
Makes them look bad.
That is one very strong component of it, isn't it? So look, I'm not going to rise to the level the standard that you're setting. Paul said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." He's encouraging us to rise to the level of not him, but to Christ. Well, we're not going to do that. And so instead, I'm going to tear you down. That's the choice we make. And that is a real thing. And it's not new, but I just point out, this one stands out to me because I remember thinking, why would that be a problem? But live and learn, grow, experience, and you realize, oh, it's a real problem. Brother Tharp.
And I don't think most of them are consciously thinking of what you just said. They're not thinking, oh, I'm a bad person, I better tear down those good people. It just, they think they're okay, and you're trying to be better. You're a hypocrite. That's what they call people that are doing good. You know, I saw you do one thing and that discounts your whole life, whatever. You know, I don't think they're consciously, for the most part, trying to tear down good people. They just feel an animosity towards good people because they're not good.
And to a degree, you're right. I mean, that's a large portion of it. You know, there's those who may think you're grandstanding. You're standing on a moral soapbox, but it's a matter of gray area and opinion. But you are taking a stand. So the problem is your stubbornness or your elitism or things of that nature. They've determined that there's a problem with you, not a problem with themselves. Not that they're trying to tear you down because you're good, but they're saying some bad in you because of that. But please don't also miss that there are those who actually go after people who are good. That does exist today. And it's still a bit mind-boggling. But it's there. Evil exists today. It's there. Everything is not that you're trying to do this, but everything is not explained away by people aren't intending. Some people know full well what they're doing and still will do it. And that is very disturbing.
They're the dangerous ones.
But what's more of a problem is when we will not recognize it. Everything we have to explain with some origin story, some story about their childhood, this, that, or the other. Some people need to bear responsibility for the decisions that they are indeed making. Everything is not about some harm and they can't help themselves. They're not responsible. That's a reality. There are people who have evil intentions and will do you harm. We don't like to talk about that. It sounds very harsh. There are those who would judge us for saying it. We need to say it anyway. That's a reality. We need to be able to identify that even within ourselves. Brother Tharp.
And I think that's part of our society. Our society doesn't, I used to argue with my friend, he said, what's evil? There's no such thing as evil. Our society doesn't like the concept of evil, so they do what you were just talking about. They explain it away. Oh, his mother used to be when he was a kid. Oh, that doesn't give him license to live his life as a murderer. Or this happened, or that happened, or he's mentally unbalanced. It's got to be something in his mind, or, you know, granted, there are people who have brain damage, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, we tend to try to find an excuse for everything everybody does, other than just saying it's wrong, it's against what God says.
Yeah. We'll call it anything except what it is. All right, we're going to end there. Let's see, how many more do we have left? Just a few. 1, 2, 3. 3. We should be able to get through this next week. That's just this verse. Let's make that our goal. Brother Tharp, I need you to miss next week. No, the discussion is, of course, good and invited. I appreciate your participation in this discussion. It's good, and it's a reason we don't have a particular schedule for our Sunday evening classes, so we can take our time and dig into some of these verses. Thank you for your attention, your participation, and we'll continue on with our song service at this time.
Number 343, let him have his way with thee. Would you live for Jesus and be always pure and good? Would you walk with him that